Okay. All right. Hey, what's up, everybody? This is the Nowhere to Go But Up podcast, and I'm your host, Sean Dustin. Tonight, I have a very special guest, and they're all special guests, but this one has a spot in my heart because she was able to take me through a 3-part journey of my story and was able to pull out of it, or pull out of me, a lot of emotion and a lot of, growth, I think, and a lot of questions and that I had for myself, and was able to, go back and revisit and listen to those episodes and kind of help to heal and to grow from it. Susan Casey is the host of the Elite podcast, and she is also a licensed mental health counselor specializing in grief and loss. Hey, Susan.
Hi, Dustin. It's so nice to be here tonight with you. Thank you
It's
so much for having me.
No, well, thanks for coming on the show. And it's 8 o'clock where you're at, which is kind of late on the East Coast for you. So I definitely appreciate you accommodating my schedule and jumping on the show at this time.
Well, yeah, so if I stumble over my words, that's why. It's just late at the end of a work day, but hopefully I'll be able to respond with some thoughtful answers.
Well, that's awesome. And so basically, let's just start off. Licensed mental health counselor. You focus on grief and loss. What lanes of mental health do you is your focus, or your, what would they call, your primary
Yep.
thing?
Well, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and there's lots of different degrees and whatnot that fall under the umbrella of counselors. And so I do direct practice on the side of what has been my full-time job now for many, many years, where I really train therapists around the country on something called measurement-based care. But on the side, with my little private practice, I really focus on grief and loss. And I'll be launching a course also on the therapeutic benefits of writing through grief and loss. And I really started to dive much more deeply into that work after the death of my brother in 2014.
Yeah, I remember you talking a little bit about that, and of course, I didn't. We were talking about my story, so I couldn't really pivot and ask you a whole lot about that. But was that sort of your, because everybody has like a nowhere to go but up moment, right, in their life,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
was that the one for you?
yes, absolutely. So my younger brother, who was 43 at the time, he lived in Bali, Indonesia. He was head of spas for Four Seasons, and he was getting ready to oversee spas for the Rosewood hotels. And he was opening those spas across Asia and developed a serious illness and died within 3 days. I've written a whole book about it. It was the most catastrophic event that has ever happened to me and my family, and really changed a lot of things for me. So that definitely was my darkest time in my life, actually. Scary, dark.
Yeah. How how did you get through it?
So it's all, I believe that,
Just not, I mean,
um,
not to take away from the, like, the book or anything like that, but just,
no, but no, the book that is what got me through it. So it's just interesting that when I had gotten my master's, when I got my master's in fine arts for writing, I wrote my dissertation on the therapeutic benefits of writing through grief, loss, and trauma long before my brother died. And I had done a lot of volunteer work at the adult prison systems for both men and women, and also in the juvenile justice system for juveniles, where I created a therapeutic writing course essentially. And so when my brother died, I had to test my own theory, and I started to blog my way through my grief. And then just it was touching a lot of people who also had lost a loved one. And so people were forwarding these posts to other people that thought that they could benefit from my writing. And so that's where the book came from. I couldn't find a lot of books on sibling loss, and I I hadn't intended on writing a book, but that's what ended up happening. And I interviewed people from around the world who had lost a sibling. And it took me 3.5 years to write the book, and when it was finally picked up by a publishing house. And That is what saved my life, was interviewing and talking to other siblings. I also, at that time, got certified as a bereavement group facilitator. So I went to the Center for Grieving Children and ran bereavement groups. So I really immersed myself in allowing myself to feel deeply my way through the death of my brother
Yeah, that
and,
sucks.
and, and the impact it had on my whole family.
Well, definitely sorry for your loss. What do you why do you think it's so impactful writing, in healing, writing your way through it? What is it, as somebody who's done that, why do you feel that it's so impactful?
It's impactful and there's research, right? So when I was writing my dissertation on this, I did a ton of research. And a lot of authors over time, memoirs that they've written, it's the same thing. They're writing their way through their experiences. And it allows when we process on paper, when we get things out of our head. That's why journaling, we hear about how, journaling our thoughts are. And it's because you're getting it out of your head and you're putting it somewhere. We can really get on a hamster wheel in our head and we go around and around and around. And even when you speak it, it's not the same. It doesn't have the same impact as writing it. And of course, there are writing prompts that I also, when I'm working with people through their trauma and writing their way through trauma, I also have some pretty specific prompts to kind of help them through that process. But for myself, it literally was writing my way through what happened to my brother and then interviewing all of these people and eventually integrating my story with their story and really seeing themes. And so, when you think about when you're going through a traumatic event, which you know very well in your own life story, you're very close to it. And the further you get away from it, the more you can look at it as more of an observer than an actual participant in that trauma, if that makes sense. And so with time, as I was writing, I could really zoom out and I'm not going to say this happened overnight, right? It was a 3.5 year process where I cried. I really felt those emotions over and over and over again as I was writing. Does that
Yeah.
answer your question?
Yeah, yeah. No, no, it does, absolutely. My next question is, what do you think makes it so difficult for people to read and write? Because it feels like it's something. I mean, even with me, somebody who, has been to prison, I read over 300 books while I was there, hardly read anything when I'm out. Even when I before prison, I just was not a reader, was not a writer. I can articulate well. I just don't have the patience to sit there and do it. Right.
Uh,
It's something and so I feel like I'm not alone in that though. I feel like there's a lot of people that are just too busy or just don't have the time or don't even want to be bothered with reading and writing. And it's not something that I feel is focused on a whole lot in school either. It's like it felt like you got enough to get you through being able to understand what's written, the written word, how to do these things, how to, identify this, identify that. So you could navigate your way through, having to sign stuff for school or for, you know what I mean? But it's like the bare minimum, right? It doesn't get taught as like a passion. I don't know, man. I just
Well,
am I
I was an
making any
English.
sense or am I
No,
just
no, you are. I was just an English major too, so I, so I've always loved reading and writing. It just happens to be a passion, and I think that's a really good point. I mean, sometimes it's a passion of people, right? These people who they just devour books and or people who love to write. I think also what's happening. So the first part of your question is I think it's a passion. I definitely think there are more people who migrate toward reading fiction or nonfiction or journaling versus writing, etc. I also think that we live in a world that has changed so much that we consume in sound bites. Think TikTok, think Instagram, think social media, where we make jokes about how it's not even a joke actually. There's that our attention span is shorter than that of a goldfish because we are constantly moving for think about it. email, text messaging, messenger. There are a million ways that we communicate with each other, and it's very quick. It's at lightning speed. People don't even use email anymore, right?
Mhm.
They go right to text. And have you ever had anyone text you, and if you don't text right back, they're like, "Hello, are you there? Are you there?" Question mark, question mark.
Yeah,
There's
question.
because it's
All
everything is
caps.
all caps. It's immediate. Things are very, very immediate, and we don't have that patience. Writing and reading both take patience. And that's why I think that even our consumption around reading, even blogging, you can look at the trending with blogging. It's got to be shorter, or people are not going to take the time to read it. Now we've gone to videoing because, everybody has a different learning style. And so it's this incredible consumption. I mean, think about TikTok, for example. Why do you think TikTok is so wildly popular right now? And I don't, especially among the younger kids. Any
Not
ideas?
just the younger kids.
No, you're right. It's true. I was thinking young adults, but
I get on TikTok, right? And I start
yeah, me too.
scrolling and I'm laughing. I'm laughing harder at this stupid little app than anything that I watch on TV, any movie that's ever come out. You know what I mean? It's like movies are just they're not the same. We're in a different place. Like comedy's not the same, the movies are not the same, and even the movies how we used to get them. You can't you can't get a funny movie anymore without having to rent it. You you would like The Hangover, here's a good example. That's a classic funny movie. No matter how many times I watch that movie, I'm laughing my ass off, right? They put it on and I was looking for it, and I used to be one of those guys that was, would pirate stuff off the internet, right? So I download the movies and, bootleg them and whatever. And so I had this hard drive that was loaded with them, right? And I'm like, oh, we've got streaming now. I pay for Netflix. I don't need this anymore. And I think I've deleted everything, right? Well, come to find out that no, not only they have them, but you have to rent them all now. Any of these movies like The Hangover, Why Him?
No, it's funny that you say that. I totally know what you're talking about because we pay for Prime, and even on Prime, you end up having to pay $2.99 for these movies, like you just said, The Hangover, that were made a million years ago. Because we just went through this over Christmas. We were looking for funny movies to
Yes.
watch, and it's true. But think about it's even the way that we're consuming those types of things. Look at Netflix series, and I have a theory about that too. Netflix series, I think that people are addicted to Netflix series again because it's it deepens the story. We get more vested in the people, in the characters. And but what do? We binge watch it because we
Mhm.
can't stand. We don't have the patience. Like we can't. And I'm guilty of this too. I mean,
Uh,
I just binged watched White Lotus. Have you seen that, by the way? It's so
mm-mm.
good.
No,
Anyway,
I'm into Yellowstone, and they make you
oh
wait.
yes.
They
They
don't
do.
they don't feed into my inability to be patient and like not wait and because that's what I do. I would do that. Ozarks, that's a good
Oh,
example.
yeah.
7 episodes in one night. You know what I mean? Too tired to go to work the next day.
Oh, and it's brilliant. Think about how brilliant it is. And
Yep.
then YouTube videos. And I mean, I can't, I don't watch TV anymore, right? You stream everything through
Mhm.
Netflix or Prime or, all of, so my point is the consumption. There is so much consumption and there's very quick gratification.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
and I think, here I am a writer and trying to get a book out into the world takes 2 to 3, it takes however long it takes to write it, then you got to get it to a publisher, and then it takes 2 years to get it on the bookshelf.
Mhm.
That's why I went to a podcast to get stuff out there more quickly for people who need it.
Mhm.
So everything is changing in our world, the way that we consume information.
Yep, it is.
That's a long answer to the question around reading and writing, but I think that that's part of it.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. All right, let me grab another one. So I'm looking at my phone because they're on a list. My girlfriend was nice enough because she'd listened to all of the stuff, all of our episodes, and she listened to some of your other ones, and
Oh,
she had
she did? That was
uh,
nice.
and so she has questions. She has always has questions.
Oh,
Females, you
good.
guys are just
Never a
constantly
shortage.
yeah, there's never a shortage of curiosity, that's for sure. All right, so
I love that she did that. That is like, see,
do
that's
you
just like this beautiful example of love, right?
right.
To get you ready.
Well, because she knows that I'm not the like, I didn't have anything written out. I just sort of knew because we've, from what I looked at
Yeah.
and the interactions that we had, like, okay, I can throw a conversation together but she's like, well, you should be a little bit more prepared than that. And I would agree. All right. So, do you prefer working with different types of therapeutic needs over others? Like, is there a certain type of issue that you
Yeah. Well, as I said, I mean, the direct practice work has really been very small, and it
Mhm,
really does focus on really purely grief and loss work now. And I think of grief and loss. I don't think of grief and loss, and you know this through our conversation together, as just death
mhm,
or death of a person. It's death of something. I really believe that we're always grieving. We're always grieving something in some way. You know, when there is an ending, there is grief, even if that ending to something is exciting, like graduating from high school, for example.
mhm.
You know, that the new beginning of going to college is very, if somebody chooses to go to college, is very exciting, but there's still going to be grief over the ending of that chapter in that young person's life. And so, I mean, I've done interviews with people who are grieving being sober. You and I talked about that a little bit too.
Yeah, there's also to the person that, when people think that they were a lot more fun to be around when,
Yes,
they weren't. And so that's tough, right? Because it's like, dude, I don't wanna be, like, not somebody who people wanna hang out with, and it's like, but I don't wanna do that because it ruined my life, so so you end up a lot of times you just those friends just fall away and you find other
new
ones
friends.
that, you know what I mean,
Mhm.
that are fit more into your normal now.
Exactly. So but we're not good about talking about grief. You know, it's what we hear, or the messages that we hear are pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and, get on with your life, get over it. I mean, we hear all of these different messages that we get about our lives. And so we feel like we're whining or complaining or whatever if we spend time talking about our grief over something that has changed in our life. And so that's really that's my passion, is to work with people around, I guess you could also call it major life transitions.
That's a good segue into this next question, which is gonna be, how do you keep from taking on your clients' traumas or situations home with you? Or, there's a name for that. I don't know what it is, but there's
Well, you hear things like transference and countertransference and things like that in our field, but I want to speak more deeply to the question that you're asking, because this is something as therapists that I think it's always a challenge, because most of us are empaths. And what I mean by that is we can feel emotion in a room, we can feel emotion coming from our clients. And I've been in this field now for close to 30 years, but it's something that I've always had to work on, in carrying people's stories without feeling weighted down and sad without taking on the emotion behind their stories. And I think that most of us, if we were really honest, that it's always a struggle because we're dealing with human beings that are in pain in some way. And so it's very difficult, I think, for to kind of set those down and close your door at the end of the day. But it is something that we always have to intentionally work on. And I know for me personally, that has not always been an easy thing for me. I I still do it. You're a good example. I interviewed you for 4 hours, and your story stayed with me for several days. But I do a lot of healthy things for myself. I eat well. I exercise all the time, and I move the energy through my body. That's what I try to do is keep moving so that I don't feel bogged down by the things that are happening in the lives of the people that come into my life and share their stories with me. It's a
Yeah,
deep honor every time.
yeah, I would imagine, and being an empath, you know what I mean? It's hard for you to not feel that. I it probably would be better
Yeah.
for someone like me to be a counselor because you know what I mean? Because I'm not empath. Well, you know what?
Well, and you're not trying to be a therapist either, right? I mean, part of
Yeah,
that empath is is I think what makes us drawn to the field to begin with is this it's a calling. It really feels like a calling to me.
yeah, I think I'm full of it on that one. I think that I am kind of empathic because when I watch stuff on TV, I can feel that it makes me cry. You know what I mean? When I hear stories, I can put myself in that situation and empathize with that and feel emotion behind it. So yeah, I probably wouldn't be a good candidate for that. I
But
had to
see,
think
but
about that for a minute.
you have a lot of compassion, and I know that just from interviewing you, and I think that you have a very open you've got an openness about you wouldn't have a podcast because people wouldn't open up and talk to you, so you have
Yeah.
that invitation that you are available to hold space for another human being's story. And that's what a therapist
Hmm, hmm. Yeah, good point. Thank you. Appreciate
does.
that. So I'm gonna pivot just a little bit
Sure.
into the counseling of the adult offenders and juvenile offenders. Let's go with the juvenile, particularly. I don't know if you worked with transitional age, 18 to 24-year olds, or if it was
Yeah,
a little
they
bit
were
younger.
well, they were I'm trying to think on that unit, I think they were well, they're still juvies and they're only there typically till 21. And so they either get out at that point or they go to the adult system. But it has to be really horrific in order for that to happen. So I worked with kids up until 21 years of age.
Okay. Now,
And I
you know,
wasn't counseling them, I was running a therapeutic writing program. I was a volunteer.
okay, okay. Well, that's even better because you're in a position where they would probably open up and trust you a little bit more
Very much so.
than they would, you know what I mean? I remember as being one of those, you know what I mean, that there were those counselors that you knew that you could just you could confide in and you can, open up to and you wouldn't have to worry about anything, whatever, you know. So, oh, damn it, I forgot what I was gonna say.
You were asking me about my work with them. So were you interested in sort of how I got the kids to
No, no, what my question was gonna be is, where do you think, because I've always felt, since I've started thinking about this kind of stuff, that untreated trauma is the number one public safety issue, right? And not dealing with it because the system doesn't deal with it, it actually further traumatizes some, and it,
You're
does.
talking specifically about the juvenile justice system, the prison system? Are you talk is that what you're talking about
Well,
right now?
what I'm yeah, the justice system, and particularly in the transitional age males, right? Because they don't really get this. We're missing the mark, is kind of what I'm getting at. And in the punitive model,
Oh
where is
God,
it do
don't
you
get me
think
started.
where is it do you think we're missing the mark? Because I have my ideas of where we're missing it and, how we're addressing it. What and I'll counter after, you answer yours, and I'll tell you what I think we're missing.
I can't wait to hear what you think because it's much more personal for you because you have an inside view.
Mhm,
I've been nothing but a volunteer. And so, but I can tell you that I think just the way the entire system is set up is punitive. I mean, it's so far from my realm of the way that I think about dealing with human beings. But because I don't work in it, I also am probably coming from an ignorant place in terms of what that world looks like on a day-to-day basis. But when you think about it, the way that the way the whole system is set up is punitive. These kids are well, first of all, I think our mental health system fails them because a lot of these kids that are in juvenile, that are in juvie, have addiction issues. They've come from severe trauma. Many of their parents are in the adult system, etc. So kids that get into the juvenile system, it takes quite a bit for them to get there to begin with, right? I mean, these kids have typically it's pretty accumulative. And then once
mhm.
they get inside the system, now you've got a bunch of angry teenagers who have been traumatized that are locked up together. How do you think that goes? Right? Not well. And
Yeah.
so now the kids are in there, they get re-traumatized, they have more offenses on the inside, so that keeps adding to their length of stay in the juvie system. And so it's a very broken system. Mental health system is broken. The juvenile justice system is broken. And I wouldn't begin to even know how to fix it. But when you talk about what's missing, we have a huge hole in our system when these kids transition out.
Mhm.
How are they supposed to be successful? What's changed for them? They're going back into the same situation or they're going into a group home. I don't know what's provided for them really therapeutically within the juvenile justice. I think it probably looks very different from facility to facility.
Mhm.
And it's heartbreaking for me what I witnessed with some of these kids. And then, you know, I mean, I'll just give you one quick story of this young man that I had been working with. This was a one-on-one. So it was outside of the writing group and I just volunteered on the boys unit with this young guy. He was doing fantastic. They got approval for him to go. He was getting out, he was getting released. So he had a job and he was given approval to take a young girl to the prom and they had a chaperone. Everything was set up and the principal of the school said no. So the kid ended up running off the job site, got arrested, and then guess what? He elevated to the adult system. I it's so profoundly sad to me when these things happen because it's anecdotal, it's one tiny story, but you can imagine that there are many stories like this. There are so many different ways that could have been handled. And
Lack of coping skills. That's what that kind of speaks to, you know what I mean? Not knowing how to handle the situation when you're told no and wanting to do it and not having the tools. Really, it's the tools and the words and the verbiage and the vocabulary to express yourself in a way that is not damaging to yourself and to people around you because you don't know how to do that.
yeah, well, it's so funny. It's like where I immediately went is how the principal could have handled it differently, right? I mean, when I think about these young kids and what they've been through and how can we hold them in light and love and, you know, if like why couldn't he go to the prom and what other things could have been put in place to make this happen because the promises were broken to this kid again. And I hear what you're saying and that he didn't have the skill set either. However, everything he was set up to fail because this was this was months in advance for him to be able to go to this prom, and it was kind of yanked from him last minute. So
But I mean,
I think,
that's a small microcosm of life,
well, I
right?
know, I
Life
know.
life life hands you stuff like that all the time, and when you don't have the skills to navigate yourself through it, sometimes you implode, sometimes you know what I mean? It really comes down to, and not to cut you off, I'm gonna let you finish, and then I'll go ahead and go.
No, you,
Okay.
like I said, I mean, you were that young kid, right? You were that young kid that was traumatized, and then, then you had your lack of sense of self-worth, and then it escalated and snowballed. But that's where I would say also to your story of, there were some adults, many adults in your life that had also failed you along that way. You don't end up as this innocent child and in the juvenile justice system and in the prison system. That doesn't happen without, like that. It
Mhm.
happens through a lot of horrific things that lead to that. But
Yeah.
I want to hear what you think of what's missing for these young kids.
So a lot of it starts out when you realize that these children are having these issues, right? Young,
Yes.
you have to there has to be something there, right, in the beginning. And I don't know, I'm thinking more along the lines of the transitional age, like when you get into 16, 17, 18, where it becomes like, okay, now you're in for a significant amount of time. I don't think that so when you talk about reentry, right?
Hmm.
Reentry, because you're going to be coming out at some point, right? A lot of the times
Hmm.
when people go,
Hopefully, that's the goal.
yeah. So most of the time, guys, when they get into these situations, right, they don't think about going home until they're close to going home, right?
Right.
Reentry needs to start from the moment you get incarcerated. You need to be thinking about, how am I going to transition from this? How am I going to get through this and then get back out and not go back into this?
Right.
That is never a thought. Usually you get thrown in there, you're if it's your first time, it's okay, you're dealing with the whole social element of it, right? Am I going to get jumped?
Hmm.
Am I going to get beat up? Am I going to do, you know what I mean? So there's all of these things that you don't think about anything else, right? It's survival. And that's just in like those situations right there. When you get into the adult levels of it, it's usually guys that have 1 to 5 years are the ones that have the problems. The guys that are doing long term, 10 years, you know what I mean, 8, 12, 20, whatever, they're spending significant amounts of time away from people. They usually don't reoffend when they get out, right? They're just, I'm not doing that again. It's the 1 to 5s like myself who don't get the you know what I
The
mean? They don't follow that model, right? We get in and we don't think about reentry until we're, 2 months to the gate, and it's like, "All right, let's think
so
about."
you so the whole time that you were in the prison system, you didn't have access to therapy,
Not really. Not in I mean, you could go and do these little, like, A or NA classes, you know what I mean, or whatever it is that they offer there. But in the federal system, I was only there for 18 months, so everything was reserved for people that have more time, right? And there's
right?
lists, there's waiting lists for these things. So even if you have 5 years, you know what I mean, there's no guarantee that you're gonna get into that, the RDAP program, which is a drug program, or any other of the programs that they have in the federal system. The state system, I don't know a whole lot about because I paroled out of it, and I was only there for 18 months anyway, so too. So there was never enough time. It's every time it was about, all right, well, I need to adjust because every new place is a new set of social things, right? And a new set of rules, a new set of politics for that particular place. So, I mean, and this is not just for me, this is anybody that's coming in. So imagine it's almost like, so think of it about like, think this is gonna be a funny analogy. So think of our politicians, right? And they get into office, and how much time do they spend actually trying to politic to get reelected for the next term, right? It's about 90% of their term is spent trying to get reelected and not dealing with their shit,
That is
right?
so
Which is
funny. Yeah.
which is their fucking constituents, right? Well, it's the same thing in prison. You get thrown in there and you're too busy dealing with like not getting beat up or bad decisions that you made
No,
in there that are going to get you beat up or you know what I mean? And so
I'm not
90
laughing because I think this is funny. I just have to say that to listeners. I'm laughing at your delivery because it's ridiculous and you're right. Like
and it's the same thing.
it's the same thing. And so you have this a very high recidivism rate, right? The guys are in and out. Juvie was the same way because you had two kinds of kids. You had kids that just exactly what you're talking about, kids that are in there for the long haul, and kids that are being tied over for court dates and things like that. So they don't get anything either. They don't get
Mhm,
access to anything, but they could sit there for a year, right?
mhm,
You know, whatever. I can't remember the lingo that they use, something like tied over, I don't remember, but
mhm,
I just remember that they were in different colored jumpsuits, right? You had the kids that were there for the long term in one color, and then you had the kids that were, waiting for court dates and things like that. So it's the same thing. And so it's just this revolving door where these kids are in and out of juvie until they
mhm.
either age out or, like I said, they have so many, you know, they've done so many different accumulative crimes that now they're going over into the adult system,
So if we
into the
could figure
county jail.
exactly. And so you can't and the problem is too is that getting programs into these places, a
It's
lot of it,
hard.
yeah, it's hard because they don't a lot of it falls on the staff, right? The staff, whatever I don't know, the sheriffs or whoever it is, it's this that staffs the juvenile system, which is the same thing as the sheriffs that staff the adult system or the prison union or the police union. They're the ones that stand in the way of a lot of these programs because it's going to fall on them to have to supervise the room that everybody gathers in to be able to do this, right? Because they can't just leave, the facilitator or a counselor there by themselves with them.
Well,
So,
I think that that probably is, I think that depends too. I was alone with the juvies and I was, well, kids in juvie.
yeah, yeah.
I call them lovingly, I call them juvies. I loved these children. I loved these kids. I volunteered with them for 5 years, but I know in the adult system, it was the same thing too. I didn't actually have somebody in the room when I was conducting the writing. However, there were no violent offenders and they were also pre-release. So they were in a situation where they were 6 months before they were going to be re-entered into back into the community, at least for the adults.
Yeah. So you're right too there. I was thinking on that one more of the adult, not the juveniles, because the juveniles are kind of they don't they there's a little bit more leniency there, unless you're in a unit that's has the more dangerous
Exactly. The more violent
problem.
kids.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I think that something needs to happen in the light of so if you're not able to get in there, like maybe some sort of a correspondent program outside where it's sort of like an outside mentorship program for guys that have gotten in, and maybe you partner with the chapel service or whoever the chaplain is that goes in there, and
A
maybe
great idea.
yeah, maybe he would spread the information like, hey, if you want to work on your reentry program, there's a correspondence program that you can get into, and you can also be able to call. You'll be partnered with a mentor on the outside, and you can make phone calls to them. Like your collect calls, because I think that's a huge part. These guys get in there, and let's just say they don't have no money to on their books to talk to their family, and not even the talking to their family is going to help because they're just in and I'll get to like what put that
That
on
could be a
hold.
big that could be a big
Put that on
trigger.
hold for a second because I'm
Yeah,
gonna get to
yeah,
that
yeah.
and down the road, right? All right, so they would be able to go through a work correspondence thing, right? So you would you get them on send them a worksheet, right, with some questions, and the next time you call them, you talk about those questions, and then anything else that's coming up, you know what I mean? And you're going to be
Hmm.
partnered with a mentor who is somebody who's been to prison or been to jail and can talk to you about situations that may arise and while you're there, or what you should be working on, what you should be thinking about. Don't worry about that over there. Stay away from the gambling and stay away from all of these other things. You need to be worrying more about what you're going to do when you get out. You know what I mean? How are you going to not get into the same situation that you left from? Because are you going back home? Because
Exactly.
if you're going back home, well, guess what? You got, little JJ down the street, you got June and little Juan over there. And that's one of your hurdles. But your biggest hurdle is going to be your family, because guess what? All of the dysfunctional shit that you've been dealing with and going through from the day you were born till the day you came here, none of you have been dealing with any of it. So you're walking right back into the same situation, which is basically a dead man's board, right? You might as well just kill yourself now, because it's not, you're walking into a bad situation that nobody's and kill yourself now. I'm not literally, I'm just saying that's like death. You're walking into what's a no-win situation, because your family is codependent, obviously, and they haven't done anything to help their situation. So you're walking in and you've just come out of a situation where you're probably a little hostile, a little angry. You've probably been bullying your family the whole time anyways before you came. So now you're right back into this situation, and boom, you pick up right where you left off. So now you've made a mess out of this situation here. So where are you going to go? Now you're going to hang out with little Juan and Daryl down the street, and you're right back in trouble again.
And you're right, and you're back in trouble again. And I think that that's part of it. When you ask the gap, the other piece of that is exactly what you're talking about. It's where is the help with the transition of coming out of incarceration and back into society, and that's integration back into a family unit, integration back into the community at large. I just, I you're probably gonna laugh at this, but Shawshank Redemption is just one of my all-time favorite movies. And I loved working with kids and adults in the prison system for all of the reasons that you're talking about, and how do we help them be successful when they get out. And it's a I just think I think it's a huge, huge problem, and it's very sad, because if there is no one to help with that kind of a transition, I mean, I know you guys have your parole officers, but they're not helping you to integrate back into your family life, right? Or
Not
what does
really.
the parole officer do? Do they help? Who helps you get jobs? Like, what is available when you're getting out of prison? Did you have any kind of help?
Not really. I mean, they just give you conditions. Like, you got to have a job by this time. And a lot of my conditions got met while I was in the halfway house, because in order for me to get out of the halfway house faster, I needed to have a job. I needed to have all these other things. But I had a leg up over everybody else, because my mom, you know what I mean? She gave me a vehicle. She gave me, you know what I mean? All this stuff that helped me to progress, which
To get off your
most
yeah, to get
most of
back
the
on your
yeah,
feet.
most of these guys don't got that. They don't have that. They
What
they
do they
don't
do? What do they do?
they're placed on these things where you got a drug test and you have to go, counseling. Like for me, it was I had to go drug test, and then I had to go to this counseling thing. They made it so many times a week, and so I would have to, figure out a way to get there, which was fine because I had a car, right? I could leave work early, I could go, do all the things that I needed to do. Now these other guys, I mean, they didn't even have jobs because they have to take a bus to get to, you know what I mean? It's like these
Right.
obstacles.
The
The
obstacles.
obstacles are going to be like, all right, man, you know what for what, for what? And that's what it's designed for. It's designed for the people to go, for what? It's easier for me to go back and do what I was doing, and then they funnel you right back into the system.
Well, and that's where I gotten sidetracked, but I was thinking about, I also do think the reentry and the level of difficulty for reentry, probably there's a big correlation between that and how long you've spent in prison, right? If you're there for 15 years, that's going to be different if you've been there for 18 months. And also you've got the guys, the women and men, and I had heard this from them too. If they have an addiction, at least for these guys that I was working with that were at pre-release, a large majority of them were in there because of addiction issues. They were stealing, they were selling, they were doing all of the things. And they would say, I'm afraid to get out because if there were a pile of cocaine in front of me, I know that I would use again. And so what do they do? They're not, when they go to prison, you guys aren't in a drug rehab facility,
Mm-mm.
right? I mean, that is not what you're working on. You're stating because you have to, or you're getting it on the inside.
And then that's where the reentry thing comes into, right? And so,
Hmm.
and here's another part of this where I think that they're getting it wrong. They're releasing people back to the same areas that
Right.
they offended.
Hmm.
And I think that a part of getting, like, if you're in California, or yeah, we'll use California as an example, right? So if you're in California and you get in trouble in Southern California, you should have to go up to Northern California and vice versa. And so it's like, if you release, this is where you're releasing to. It takes the family trauma out of it and the family element out of it, and it also takes the friend element out of it, and it forces you to have to, because when you're bored, because you ain't got nothing to do in the halfway house, what are you gonna do? You got no friends. Nobody's gonna come all the way down up there to come down and hang out with you. You're forced to have to figure it out, right?
Yeah.
I guess I better go get a job. I better start looking for work because they ain't gonna let me leave unless I do. There's no options. And when there's no
Right.
options, most people do what they're supposed to do.
You, yeah. And yeah. What do you mean? Do what they're supposed to do?
Well, you know what I mean? Like, you have, if you're in a structured environment, if you don't have any other options to distract you from doing what you're supposed to be doing, you're gonna do what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. You just made me think about a woman that I am working with right now. One of the few clients that I have, she lost her son to a drug overdose. And, he had spent a couple of years in prison. Same thing. It was all due to his addiction. And he was in his halfway house and he had just moved up to get more privileges. They live independently and they have a job, and he ended up overdosing on fentanyl. And it's such a tragic story because, 23-year-old kid doing fantastic. What happened?
Mhm.
His mother, they'll never know. They don't know what happened. You know, his girlfriend broke up with him.
That
Did he
was it.
go did he try to take his life? Was it accidental? Who knows? But this is what I see over and over is that so much of I think that there are just so many reoffenders where really at the heart of it they've got these drug and alcohol addictions, right? And even when you're and and that their crimes are related to that in some way,
Mm,
especially when you start, robbing stores and things like that for money or whatever to help support that addiction. It's
yeah, no,
heartbreaking. It's just heartbreaking.
what you're describing is, I feel like there's a couple of things at play there. One is the girlfriend, that was a trigger, and the
Yeah.
not having the coping mechanisms and the tools to deal
Yeah.
with that, to you know what I mean? Doesn't matter that you're doing good if you haven't figured it out. If you haven't figured out what you're going to do in that situation, right? Because it's going to come up as an addict. It's going to come up. You're going to get confronted with this at some point. You're going to be put in a situation where your immediate auto response is going to be your
The
norm,
default.
your
Yes.
default.
We
It's the
default to what we know. Yes.
and so he hit that default, right? Because he didn't have the tools to deal with it. He probably talked himself into it, like, hey, I deserve this. I've been doing good, because that's what we do. I've done it myself. Like, oh, I deserve this. I've been doing well. I've look at how good I'm doing. One time won't hurt. And
Right.
and she broke up with me anyway. So why do I need to stay sober for now? It's that you're talking yourself into it instead of talking yourself out of it. What you should be
Right.
doing is playing the tape of like, okay, how could this go wrong? How badly could this end up? Instead of all the reasons why it's okay for me to do it. And
And I
then once
also
you do it, but once you do it, now that we're in the fentanyl era, right? You don't know anymore about what
right.
you're taking, how strong it's going to be, what it could be. And then some of these people, when they stop using for 2 years or longer, they go back to the same amount that they used the last time they used, and they don't have the tolerance anymore. So if there's some fentanyl in there, bye.
Well, and our fentanyl is it's killing our young people, right? And our adults too. I mean, things that are laced with fentanyl. I read a story not long ago on two young girls who college age who had eaten gummy bears, with THC gummy bears. Like you would never, you'd ever think about that edibles are going to be laced with fentanyl? Didn't even know that that was happening. And so
Snapchat. Did you watch the Joe Rogan episode with Dr. Phil on it?
no.
So you can watch this one. It talks about this, right?
Okay.
So Snapchat is where all the kids are, right? So they went and they did a thing where so Snapchat has these menus of things that you can buy, like edibles, like different other things that you can buy on there. You hit a number, I guess, and it can get delivered to you. Well, a lot of the stuff that
Oh
they
my
they
God.
they pulled off of there and they tested, all of it had fentanyl in it.
Fentanyl.
And so what Dr. Phil says is he's like, this isn't an epidemic. This is a terrorist attack because all the fentanyl is coming from China and it's coming up through the Sinaloa cartel through Mexico. And if you know your history, all right, I'm gonna throw some conspiracy out there for everybody. But if you know your history, right, there was a company called the East Indies Trading Company way back in the day when the opium wars were happening, and Great Britain saturated China with opium and set their society back like 50 years. And so I think that this is just nothing more than payback for
Mm,
what because we're considered the West, Great Britain, United States, we're still the West,
hmm.
right? We came from that, and so we still are that. And so that's where I think it's all coming from. And it's just
That's really
another
interesting.
it's a different attack on our country. I mean, we're at war, right? We're at
Hmm.
war with a bunch of different places and different things. And we can't have hot wars like we used to, especially being that we're the superpower that we are. They can't attack us in that way. So they have to do it in other ways. And so that's where you're seeing the dissent, the bots and stuff that cause all the chaos in the elections and stuff like that. And then also what else is it? I don't know, I can't remember what I was saying, but you get the point.
I do, and and I would have to agree. I think that I hadn't really thought about it as a terrorist attack, but you know, we are losing so many people through fentanyl overdoses, and it's terrifying. And I talked to I do not have any children, but of course, the majority of my friends have adult children, or at least kids in college. And you go to college, you go to a party, you pop a pill, right? Isn't that part of the whole college experience for a lot of kids is you are
Mhm.
experimenting with different things. And now you can't do that in any kind of it's much it's much scarier now, I think, for parents, but the kids need to get the message nothing is safe. You can't even smoke a joint. You don't even know if the joint is laced. I mean, it's a scary world that these kids are growing up in. And of course, we also know for our adult population that also have addiction issues that they're dying.
Yeah, you have to ask yourself this question when you look at it as the terrorist part. Why would I mean, if this is a business model, what kind of model kills
Right.
their clients?
That's exactly.
You
And
know what I mean? That's not
it doesn't make any sense. And so That's always the question. Like, I know even me and my, my friends who are therapists will talk about that. Of course, it doesn't make any sense. You don't kill off your customer base, but these dealers, I believe, have no idea that these drugs are laced with fentanyl. But I mean, these are just inferences that I'm making. But what do you
Mhm.
think about that? I mean, do you agree with that? That they're not aware?
I would think that some are. I would think that some are not aware, but the potency of the drug, right? There's I mean, even with if you just look at the Snapchat thing, right? If if that's legit true, and it's all over Snapchat and kids are purchasing from these, right? And I can't see it as anything else. You know what I mean? It just doesn't make any sense. And then knowing the things that I know about, the history and then paying attention to all the other stuff that's happening around us in the country and the world, and I know too much. Sometimes it's maybe overload, right? But I mean, you have to
Hmm.
look at things in that way because especially in the last 3 years, what we've uncovered and even in the last Twitter file thing that's been going on for the last 3 weeks, what Elon Musk has uncovered over there and what was going on. I mean, you have to question everything now. I mean, nothing is what we really thought it was, unless you're stuck on CNN or Fox News or
Yeah,
some other some other corporate media legacy outlet, right? If you're there, you don't know what I'm talking about. Everything that's coming out of my mouth right now is like
right,
blasphemy. You know what I mean? How dare you?
right.
Talk about our whatever democracy that way. But I mean, if you're in anywhere else other than that, it's very, very apparent where we're at, you know, and it's just up to, us as citizens. I mean, the citizenry of this country, and it's not even so much this country, it's just now we're aware of it in this country. But if you look at all the other countries across the world and you see how little freedom they have,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just look, I mean, they're that's what governments do. They don't want you to, they want you to be good citizens and do what you're supposed to do and toe the line and don't get out of line. And so China's really good about it.
Look
And
at
it's
TikTok. I don't know if you've been hearing about, TikTok. I was just listening to a podcast about, trying to ban TikTok, and I think it's already banned in some states because the app I believe is from China. And there's all this. I haven't finished listening to the entire story on the Wall Street Journal, but there's theories about that too, what they're collecting and the information that they're getting from TikTok users.
Mhm,
So I don't think we really have a grip on the way that we are monitored and followed. I mean, not to get into weird conspiracy, I just think it's true. Like we're on social media. We're being tracked all the time. Data every time we do anything,
mhm.
anytime we click anything, all of that is data. Why do you think if you jump on your computer, all of a sudden I'll see 5 shirts that I looked at over Christmas, right? I mean, there's a reason for that. They start targeting you and the messages that you get and all of those things. It's like I mean, we are essentially being controlled
Mhm.
through all of this data that's being collected and what's being marketed and to us, as soon as we jump on our computer. I
Yeah,
mean, if you think about it too much, it's actually terrifying.
well, I mean, from the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep, it doesn't matter what it is you're doing. Your phone is tracking you.
Yeah,
It's figuring out your routines, your patterns, your spending, your this, your that, everything, right? You talk
everything.
it hears you say, I need to oh, I'm God, my tires are getting bald. I need to get some new tires here at some point. You go 2 hours goes by and you go back on your phone, all of a sudden you got some tire
Ads.
advertisements, right? And
Yeah,
you're like, what? No, nah, okay. Anyways, and you say something else to somebody, and maybe one person goes, yeah, but like five of them go, oh, you're crazy, right? And so then you think, yeah, yeah, maybe I am. and you don't think about it anymore until it happens again, right? Well, I mean, at
Yeah.
what point is that not that's
We're always being tracked. We're always being tracked. I mean, we just
yeah, I
are.
mean, but is that freedom? I mean, are we free? I mean, you got to start asking yourself those questions, right? Or is this just an overlay of freedom, right? And we're really in these mazes, right? These mazes of flow of citizenry, right? And so we think that, well, for a long time I thought we were free, right? It's like, oh yeah, freedom, America, all these things that you think of, right, when you think of freedom. And the last 3 years, it really showed that not really, right? They have the media, this huge leg which controls at least 60 to 60, I'm going to say 65% of the population. You know what I mean? It controls them and their thoughts, and the agendas that are being played out, through whatever it is. You get this, it happens, and that it happens, and the anything that's a part of the Associated Press is a part of the media conglomerate that's controlled by a few,
Mm,
not like a whole bunch of different companies. It's like four, right? Like four billionaires, which are a part of the other billionaires that control the other legs of industry, gas and oil, pharma, all
yeah.
these other ones, right? And those are only owned by a couple of people, but they all are a part of these investment firms, which are called BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. All these big firms are all these people, all the billionaires, the 1/16th of the 16th of the percent of the 1%. And that doesn't include the millionaires, because they're nothing. The millionaires are nobody, right? The
Yeah.
billionaires are the ones that really
They control the
at the
country.
party.
Yeah.
They're at the party. They're making things happen. I mean, just think about it.
Oh, yeah. 100%. I mean, it is. Remember way back in the day, I mean, this was a long time ago when I took white collar crime and my eyes were really big when I'd hear these stories like, oh my God, you're kidding. And of course, we always hear a big thing that's happening for us in the mental health field right now are these entrepreneurs that are starting these startup companies, right? There's a lot of startups. You've heard of them, Cerebral and Done and BetterHelp. And there's a whole bunch of them out there that really took off during the pandemic because, now
Mhm.
people who didn't have access to mental health, didn't have transportation, etc. Now you can jump on Zoom and I can have access to a counselor just like
Mhm.
that quickly. And then Cerebral, they just did a 4-part series on the Wall Street Journal podcast around controlled substances for ADHD, for example, Adderall. And when the pandemic hit,
What?
the FDA suspended a lot of the regulations around controlled substances because people could not get because prior to the pandemic, you had to go and you had to sit with your provider and they had to assess you in order to determine whether or not, did you really have ADHD? What do you need for a med, etc. But during the pandemic, that the FDA suspended the regulations around that to make it easier for people to have access that weren't you couldn't go see your doctor. I mean, you just couldn't. We were all in. So
So
then the CEO was ousted and they were under investigation, etc. And but this has been happening with Dunn. They had some issues as well. And when you talk about pharmaceuticals, they make billions and billions and billions of dollars. So you can imagine that if people have an addiction issue, controlled substances are very addictive, right? So
mhm.
wouldn't you go to Cerebral if you could have a 30-minute assessment and get yourself some medication? That makes it a lot easier. They were not, I don't believe they were trying to cause harm, but I think like any of these startups, they you can imagine they just exploded, right? People are like word on the street, you can go to Cerebral. Well, a young kid ended up dying, took his own life, and we know, with some substances like Prozac, things like that, there are warnings that it can make you feel
Mhm.
homicidal or suicidal. And they weren't supposed to see young people without consent, yada, yada, yada. And this is what kind of blew the doors open on it was this kid took his life and then subsequently the parents found the prescription med and it linked to cerebral, etc. So
Mm.
I don't even know what got me on that tangent, but
Well, I mean, if you really think, if you think about it, BetterHelp was they had a huge a marketing campaign,
it
and
better,
they're
yeah,
on all the big podcasts. Joe Rogan, they're BetterHelp,
they
BetterHelp.
uh, they are huge.
I even called them, and because I was, wanted to, for whatever reason, I was like, I need somebody to talk to. Let me call them and see what they got, right?
Hmm.
And
Oh, what
it's
was your experience? I'd love to hear.
it was all I didn't talk to anybody, I don't think. It was all back and forth on email, and I was like, they gave me a price, and I was like, it was like 54 or something, so $50 a session. And I was like, it's a little expensive, probably not gonna do it. Okay, well, we can send over some numbers and your financial information, which they didn't really verify. They just asked some questions, and then they knocked it down to like 35 or something. And so they've got some room. They try to get you at a high number, and then they'll try to lower it to a point that they can bring you in.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, I just think that it's a double-edged sword because when now that you've got telemental health, it does make it more accessible for people. Like I said, people who have transportation issues or people who might, you know, just for whatever reason aren't able to get to a therapist, that it makes it so much easier for people to have that. But then there are other issues that can also come. I mean, I've heard, not necessarily about better health, but other telemental health where clinicians aren't getting paid in a timely way, or clients don't see the same therapist twice, or so I think that there are huge pros and cons to both with this new telemental health model that we had prior to COVID, but really exploded after COVID happened. And, I work with clinicians around the country, and that there are some places that have now, even if they did have brick and mortar, are still in this hybrid where they're still continuing to see their clients like us on a Zoom call or whatever.
Yeah, and so and that brings up another point, right? And so if you have all of these counselors now that are going to be in, they don't need to have a brick and mortar location because they could do literally what you and I are doing right now.
Yep.
I mean, I could even jump on my couch if I wanted to, and then I didn't want to see you and have these headphones on, and you can
Yep. Absolutely.
talk to me through a session, right? Because really, that's
Yep.
all you're doing. You have I've done sessions before where I've had my eyes closed the whole time, pretty much, because I'm just,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And yeah,
People are in the comfort of their own home. Exactly.
so as somebody who works in commercial construction, right? What's the need for us to do new construction anymore when you're going to have all of these vacant office buildings, offices, places, because people are now working from home? I mean, even though some of these folks are trying to get these people to come back, once you've, it's kind of hard, once you, unless you force them, but I mean, can you prove that they're less productive at home versus at the office? I mean, you know what I mean? And I just think I think a lot of people realize that how much time they waste in
Commuting.
commuting.
Yeah.
It's time you
And
can't get back. I struggle with this all the time. I mean, 2 hours, sometimes 2.5 getting home. I mean, that's a lot. You add that up in a week. That's
it's a lot. Yeah. But I would say that that's a personality thing, just like students. Like you have some students that are very self-directed. They can take the initiative. They did great during COVID.
yeah.
Other kids, it was horrific. Those kids that do struggle, and need that interaction and they need that additional guidance. And I think it's the same with adults. It's a personality thing. I've worked remotely now for I don't even know, 25 years, forever. I've worked remotely for a very long time. I love it. Other people really struggled with COVID, like they couldn't focus or because you have to, it's a mindset. If you're in the office and you're scheduled, it's you're there to work, and some people love going to a place. I love working from home, but there's a discipline to it, right? That especially if you're not scheduled on calls, that you have to be pretty disciplined in terms of getting your work done because you can get very distracted when you're at your house because there's always things that can get done at your home.
No, that's true. If you have kids too, that's another one. But yeah, I mean, it's just, it's going to be interesting to see how all of this, I mean, because you see it's a, I mean, even from the digital currency, right? You look at what happened with the FTX F thing, right? The Sam Bankman-Fried. Well, I mean, I think it's really interesting that this guy, comes out of nowhere and he's the biggest donor to the Democratic Party. And then all of a sudden, you have the crypto fall, right? The whole crypto, all of that took a dive. And then this Friedman guy character comes around with the biggest heist of crypto and, the history of whatever.
Oh, yes, I guess, yes, yeah.
Okay, and then you have the Binance thing that happened, which is a little smaller, but it all is happening at the same time, right?
Hmm.
And so what does that do? Right on the heels of that, you've got the federal government now wanting to regulate it, right? Ooh, look what happened here. Now we got to regulate this thing. And so
Yeah.
it's just, I mean, it's all an act, man. I mean, they put these things, I mean, it's too scripted. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And as we know from what we've been watching, it's getting harder and harder for people that are in the know to be fooled anymore. And so anyways, we got on to a tangent of my
I
conspiracy,
know
my
we've kind of been all
conspiracy,
over the place.
yeah, my conspiracy minded stuff. So we're at an hour and 15, which is probably way past your bedtime. And I could go on forever because I'm a talker, but maybe we'll revisit, on a time when we have more time to talk, like it's during the day. You know what I mean? And you don't need to
Yeah,
go to
but
bed.
this has been wonderful though because you've really sparked, you've reignited my passion for people in the prison system, actually.
Well,
I mean,
we need to talk about that at some time too, because
we do.
I've been trying to get into some here, and it's difficult. It's even to the boys ranch that I was there. I mean, who better to talk about this type of stuff than somebody that's been through your program and is where they're at. And so it's just it's been hard. I don't know what it's gonna take. I don't know if it's gonna take me having to write this book and then start speaking and then get some notoriety behind my name and my story, that it's like, "Oh, yes, we wanna have this guy."
Well, I always used to joke about it. It's hard to break out and it's hard to break in to prison because it's a very dense, locked up system. And I know that for me, just getting in there to volunteer took a lot of perseverance on
Mhm.
my end. I had to jump through a lot of hoops to finally be able to even get into volunteer. I just think it's a very locked up, dense system, and there are a lot of hoops you have to jump through to be able to get on the inside. I don't know how else to say it. I mean, it's
Well, so I was sent something. Check this woman out. She goes into the prison systems, and I'll send you a link to this too.
is that the one who goes in and interviews them for stories?
No, she actually goes and she does the Compassion Prison Project. Her name is Fritzy something, and she's the one that does the circle. And she says, "Step forward if boom," right? Step forward if, and it's like all these men that are in there, and like they've never dealt with those situations, right? They never really even thought about probably, hey, if you were, beaten as a child, step forward. If you were abandoned as whatever, step forward. If you know what I mean, you don't
Mm.
think about that,
Will
and you
you
definitely
send
don't
that
think
to me?
about that. Yeah, yeah,
Send
yeah. I'll
that to
send it.
me. I would love to see what they're doing.
Yeah, I'll send you the because I have the news, the CBS news thing, and then also her website and everything else. I'm gonna try to get her on the show and interview her about how she got into that and how it's working because she's dealing with the situations inside. I want to
Yeah,
be able to I want to what I want to create is something where I can catch them on the way out. You know what I mean? Either help them while
yeah,
they're in and then be that catch on the way out and figure out where they need to, how we're gonna like as a mentor basically.
yeah, yeah. I love that. I've loved this whole conversation, even though we've sort of, I feel like we've kind of been all over the place, but I think it leads back to, I think all the work that you're doing, and and the name of your podcast is There's Nowhere to Go But Up. But I think that there are populations that are so oppressed and so held down that how do we as a society help them, grow those pair of wings so that they can actually fly? And as cliche as that sounds, now that I think that we've been talking about the prison system and the juvenile justice system, that I think they're such oppressive systems that I think it's very challenging for people to get out and to succeed. So I
Well,
appreciate the conversation.
the folks like me who've been in the situation and
Yeah,
others out there who, especially the ones that sometimes they've done the 20 years and they've gotten out and they need something to do,
yeah,
that those are the ones that are going to be the people that move these guys forward and through whatever it is that they're coming out of. And we need to intrude into this system, right? We always wait for, an invitation to come into the system and to help. No, no, no. We need to intrude into it. And however that is, whether it's, the correspondence through the mail, right? I can't get in the doors, then I'm going to come through the mail system, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's what it's going to take.
Let's set up time for you and I to talk more specifically about this. Actually, I'd love that.
Okay. No, for sure. We will. Definitely. I've got your website there on the screen there, Susan Casey or
Yep,
susanekc.com.
yep.
And that's where all of the Leap podcast, everything that you're doing, your book, everything Susan Casey is over there on her website. So
Yeah,
there'll be
I'm
links to
revamp,
that.
and I'm working on that website, and then the course, the grief and loss course. It's 9 weeks. I'll be putting that up there at the end of the month
Okay,
too.
great. And then all your social media and everything, you've got links to that within your website, correct?
Yes, everything's in there. Yep.
All right, cool.
And thank you
Well,
for
thank
this.
you for coming on the show. I'm so happy to have you. I felt like there's a reason why you and I cross paths, and we're figuring that out as we move through our relationship and getting to know each other and how we can help benefit each other in the future and helping other people in whatever
Yeah.
population it is that we can figure out how to bring some help to.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you. I love the work that you're doing with this podcast. I've been listening to your episodes as well. You just had a really powerful woman on. What was her name?
Oh
That
yeah, that was Madeline Black. She's
Madeline. Oh, yeah, she was really, what an incredible story.
Yeah, she's the Unbroken.
Yeah.
She had the TEDx talk that I had
Yeah, I
to.
watched her TEDx talk. I watched it. It was incredible.
Yeah, she's a great speaker. There's David DeRocher too. He's another one that I had from the TED talk. I'll send you that too. He's doing the stuff at the Other Side Academy up in Utah, which is a therapeutic community, which is a behavior modification. It's not a drug rehab.
Interesting. Yeah, I would
Y-
love anything. Send me anything like this. I just would love to even connect with these people who are doing
Yeah,
some really cool work out there.
cool. No, I'll do that. I'll email it to you.
Okay, thank you. Have
All
a
right,
great night.
Susan. You have a good night
Okay.
too. Until
Okay.
next time.
Bye.
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 You've been listening to the Nowhere to Go But Up podcast. Sean is a single dad, a union blue-collar guy, and he spent time in federal and state prison for drug trafficking and fraud. When he was released from prison in 2006, all he had was the clothes on his back, a bag of mail, and some paperwork. Since then, he's turned his life around and shares the struggles and successes on this podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we hope you were moved. To connect to the show, book a guest spot. For merch, Patreon, PayPal, and social media links, go to linktr.ee/nowhere to go but up. On Instagram at Nowhere to Go But Up Now. On Twitter at But Up Now. On the YouTube channel at Nowhere to Go But Up Podcast. See you next time.